Hello, BookTube. I've got a tiny bit of mail for you today. There's a whole lot of mail opening happening off camera here on this channel. That's bad. So I thought I would snag at least a bit of mail and open it on camera today on a beautiful, warm summer day. 70, 72 degrees Fahrenheit. Bright and sunny. Just shirt sleeves weather. Windows all open. The whole place nice and fresh. I'm not even going to bother anymore wondering how long this is going to last. I think this is the new normal. I think days, individual, singular days where the temperature goes down low or where it gets actually cold, I think those days will be rarer and rarer. They'll be the sort of thing we start to talk about for days on end because they aren't a normal rule for what used to be called the season of winter. But I will take days like today. This was lovely, absolutely lovely. First thing this morning, as soon as I could get my sleepyhead bean out of bed, I actually thought about running errands. Getting a few things done, a few beginning of the month things done that aren't, it's not quite the beginning of the month anymore, and yet they aren't done. And just as I was thinking that, it started to pour rain. And we were actually outside when it happened. We got caught in the rain. Frida hates that. She looks at me like, well, stop this immediately. We both headed back inside, and I was standing there at the window, and the rain was just slapping against the windows. It was pouring down everywhere. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go out in this. I might muss up my hair. And just when I finally shifted mental gears and decided that I was not going to do errands that day, the rain stopped. So it was still a lovely day. All the dog walks we've had since have been absolutely lovely. And Frida has an extra strut in her step, of course. I think I might have mentioned this recently, that she killed yet another mouse. She is now at 46 mice for a lifetime total. It reminded me of an encounter with a dog that we had, I think, last year in the neighborhood. Here in the neighborhood, there's this big, gnarly dog. Frida, she reads the riot act to dogs when she sees them. Stiffens up, starts with a deep beehive growl down in her throat that's only for me, and then explodes into verbal pyrotechnics. There's nothing to them. She doesn't mean them. She is not going to attack a dog, no matter what she does. That is just for her to let the other dog know the lay of the land. This is what the situation is. If you come over and stand meekly, certainly don't try to play with me. I'm not a puppy. If you stand meekly, I will inspect you, and then you may go on your way. Now, she did that to this dog. And I was smiling. I always smile at people when she does that because I want them to know that this is not dangerous. This is not, they can actually meet. Unless your dog is dangerous. My dog is not. She just sounds that way. And the other dog's owner was smiling as well. And he brought his dog over. His dog is very friendly. This big, enormous, massive, scarred muscle, but very friendly. I could tell right away. The owner didn't want to talk about it, I could sense. But the dog was clearly a rescue. So my hat's off to that owner. But the dog was coming closer and closer to Frida, and he was very, very timid. He was crouching, and she continued her fusillade. She usually keeps up the verbal fusillade until the dog is right near her, and then she stops because she's not actually aggressive. She just wants you to know that you must approach with deference. and they started to sniff each other, and everything was just fine. The other dog's owner was saying, well, I don't understand. He doesn't cringe with most other dogs. Why is he cringing with your dog when she's a fraction of his size? And when owners say that sort of thing to me, I never do. I never confront them. Of course, I'm always Mr. Congeniality, but I always want to say, your Labradoodle, your floppy Labrador, your floppy Golden Retriever, they agonize over which toy to take out of their toy chest for the night. They'll make many decisions. They'll go back and forth, and sometimes they're not happy with the decision that they make, and they huff and they flounce. And Frida has killed 46 mice in cold blood in a hunt, in a blur of motion, savagely. That's why. That is one of the first things that dogs communicate to each other. Should you defer to me or not? That's the reason. It doesn't have anything to do with physical size. But anyway, I thought we'd go through. There's a tiny bit of mail that we can go through, including a periodical. I got the latest London Review of books in the mail, which will have a lot of really interesting stuff in it. I'm sure I haven't gone through it yet. But there was a letter that I have to share with you. I have said many times on this channel that there is almost never a good circumstance in which a book's author can write a letter to a review journal where a review of their book appeared. Usually those letters are unbelievably ill-advised. Usually they will only make the author look terrible. And some readers, the dedicated ones, the ones who read these journals, will remember that. They'll remember it sometimes for years. I do. I know I'm not the only reader who does. I have said many times in the past that pretty much the only circumstance in which a letter to the journal is valid is if the journal's review gets a fact wrong. If the reviewer says, this book says X, when in reality it's Y. And it turns out it's actually X. Well, then a letter saying the reviewer is simply wrong is in order, but it should never come from the author. The author should get a letter sent to the review journal's editor from their publisher so that a correction can be issued, or even so that the letters page editor can issue an apology in the letters page. And people don't read the corrections, but they'll look at what's in the letters page. But that's it. There should never be a case in which the author of the book responds to a review. That's just not how it works. That can't help but make you look bad. And authors have not got that memo because one of them responds today, I want to read you because this is not a typical example. Ordinarily, authors of books write in and say, you got a fact wrong, how dare you, that sort of thing. This is slightly different from that. This is by the author, M.W. Rowe, from Kent, the lovely country of Kent, writing about the M.W. Rowe is the author of J.L. Austin, Philosopher and D-Day Intelligence Officer. So, in other words, M.W. Rowe ought to be on his knees thanking Allah 3 times a day that he got a review at all. Much less he got a full review in the London Review of Books. That is only good. That is only to the good. You are ahead of the game even if the author of that review savages your work. He's still savaging it in one of the highest profile literary journals in the Western world. But that wasn't enough for Mr. Rowe, who writes, in his review of my book, Thomas Nagel gives an accurate account of my argument that the main reason for the very high casualties on Omaha Beach was that it was defended by the first-rate 916 Grenadier Regiment with extra artillery drawn from 2 additional battalions, rather than the Ost Battalion of the 716 Static Infantry Division as Allied intelligence had expected. Anthony King contends that it wasn't this mistake that explains the disaster on Omaha, but the high bluffs behind the beach from which the Germans were able to enfilade American troops. That response from Anthony King was in the letters column. And this author cannot let it alone. He says that the reviewer of his book accurately represented his own argument, that the reason for the slaughter on Omaha Beach was that the Allied troops encountered better troops. It was not the covering fire from the cliffs. But he goes on. The Allies had studied Omaha for at least 2 years before D-Day and were perfectly familiar with the potential dangers of its physical geography. They knew it presented more formidable difficulties than other beaches and did their best to counter them, but realized nonetheless that casualties on Omaha were likely to be higher. They still felt, however, that the landings on Omaha had a reasonable chance of succeeding without unreasonable casualties. What turned the anticipated difficult fight into a slaughter was the fact that the beach was defended by much better troops, and troops who were much better armed than the Allies expected. There were many causal factors which created the problems on Omaha. The bluffs, the rough weather, the inaccuracy of early morning bombing, the fact that the swimming tanks were launched too far out, etc. But if I were pressed to identify the main causes of the Omaha disaster, then Allied ignorance of the 916 Regiment's position and additional armaments remains the best candidate. Yes, if you were pressed to make that case, that's exactly what you would say, and presumably you were so pressed that you wrote a book about it. And yet, when some Randall Calrissian in the letters column of the London Review dares to challenge your thesis, you have to reprise it for them in a letters column. You can't leave well enough unknown. This makes the author of this book look unbelievably insecure. It makes, by extension, his book look insecure. Also, the letter writer, let's get the letter writer's name. Anthony King writes that it wasn't so much the quality of the troops, it was the barrage of fire from the cliffs. What if Anthony King is right and you're wrong? Oh, you repeat your theory as though it were a settled fact. But what if there was more enfilade fire from the cliffs than the Allies had anticipated? There, in fact, was a lot more, and it was better troops doing that. It wasn't necessarily the troops with the tanks and on the ground with the rifles. It it's a subject open for debate. This author doesn't seem to think so, but putting himself out here like this, it just makes him look terrible. It makes him look insecure. It makes him look like he can't stand to have anyone even lightly disagree with the tenet of his book, which doesn't say much for his confidence about his book. But anyway, I will read the rest of it, of course. I have a sort of a plan in mind for reading the London Review and the TLS and the New York Review of Books. I have sort of a plan in mind that I'm evolving. We'll see how that plan goes. But in the meantime, we have a couple of books. You've got dog stories, you've got a periodical book. I opened one book off camera that I want to show you. I opened a few, but they're academic things. I'm not sure how interesting they'd be. But this thing is a romance that's coming out in December, I believe. Yes, December 5th, just a month away. This is Raiders of the Lost Heart by Joe Segura. It has one of these cartoon covers that I have come to hate. I just unambiguously hate them. They are everywhere. I can't wait for AI-generated artwork to supplant this fad. And it's trade paperback. This is going to be $17. So that's a lot for a romance you're going to read once and toss. But what have we got here? Archaeologist Dr. Socorro Corey-Maya has a bone to pick, literally. It's been Corey's life goal to lead an expedition deep into the Mexican jungle to search for the long-lost remains of her ancestor Chimali, an ancient warrior of the Aztec Empire. When she's invited to join an all-expenses-paid dig to do just that, Corey is sure it's too good to be true, and she's right. As the world-renowned expert on Chimali, Corey should, by rights, be leading this quest, not sharing the glory with her disgustingly handsome nemesis. But Dr. Ford Matthews has been finding new ways to best her since they were in grad school. Ford certainly isn't thrilled either. With his life in shambles, the last thing he needs is a reminder of their rocky past. But as the dig begins, it becomes clear they'll need to work together. A thief is lurking around their campsite, forcing the pair to keep their discoveries and lingering attraction under wraps. That did sound really good. That sounds really fun. So I will read that soon. I doubt that I'll wait until December. But I did manage to remember one package. We do have one package that we can open together. And hope for the best. We can hope that it's not food for thought. It's only one package. Oh, good, and it's not. Okay, great. This is a finished copy of something I've already read, something that I really liked, and that we've seen already on this channel. This comes out, is this a December release as well? Yes, this is the finished copy of Andrew Pettigree's book, The Book at War, which was quite good. There is a review of this thing in my forthcoming December book section of Big Canoe News in Northern Georgia. Let's see here. We tend not to talk about books and war in the same breath. One ranks among humanity's greatest inventions, the other among its most terrible. When the flames of warfare destroy libraries and turn books to ashes, we grieve this loss as an immense human and cultural tragedy. Yet this book subverts our perception of books and war as opposites, arguing instead that the two have been intertwined for centuries. And Pettigrew really does do that in the course of this book. He makes it pretty clear over and over again that armies on the march were under orders from their civilians, from their superiors, to destroy universities, libraries, bookstores. And it wasn't just the bad guys. It was everybody who did that. You were under orders to destroy those things. Books were targets. As much as they were also weapons of propaganda or morale, as is pictured on this cover here. That's covered in this book as well. But they were often also targets. It's fascinating reading. Just fascinating. This guy is so good on bookish-related subjects. Somewhere in this room, I don't know if, you can see it right over my shoulder there. The library, he co-wrote the library there with Arthur de Wedderwen about the history of libraries, and it's wonderful. It's going to go right on the shelf next to that. This is certainly a keeper. I'm glad I have the finished copy. I will reread it, and you can read a review of it in the December Big Canoe News, the December Smoke Signals for Northern Georgia, for the Big Canoe community in Northern Georgia. A beautiful book section. Number of you have complimented. You went and looked it up in response to recent mentions and have complimented me on how lovely it is. I don't deserve any of those compliments. It's the people who are putting together the mock-up of the page that really are at the top of their game. They really are fantastic. They make the whole paper look like something Well, then it doesn't just look like something that's really professional. It is something that's really professional. It sticks out. For local newspapers, it sticks out. The quality of the paper, the quality of the layouts, the quality of just everything. It was one of the first things I noticed about Smoke Signals, and it was one of the things that prompted me to take the job as their book section editor, is that it doesn't look like a local paper at all. I've written for more than my share of local papers, and I love them, don't get me wrong, but you can tell at a glance what they are, and that's not true here. So I'm sure when this review happens, if it hasn't happened already, it will be quite lovely. This was the December issue. Pretty sure this was the December issue. It could be the issue that just came out. No. Well, I don't have it right to hand, but some of you would have to tell me. Some of you get it in the mail now. It's a really good book section that you can get in the mail. You won't have quite as much involvement with the rest of the paper if you don't live in Georgia. You won't have quite as much involvement with the rest of the paper as you would with, say, the rest of the Washington Post. But the book coverage is really good. So anyway, there are our two books, a romance and history, both set for release on December 5th. And the London Review of Books, with a further admonition to you authors out there. No matter how badly you want to, do not write a letter to the editor. Don't do it. Don't do it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.